Hi, I'm Martha. Welcome to my sewing studio. This is week 5 of sewing a wool winter coat. If you're joining me for the first time today, I highly recommend you check out the previous videos in this series to see how we got here. A lot has gone into it to get us this far. Last week was especially juicy. I made a vlog style video like this one, as well as 2 standalone tutorial posts for special techniques. I did bound buttonholes and welt pockets. If you watched those videos and you liked them, please give them a like and a comment. It's kind of the only way I know that you want to see more of those from me. They were fun to make, but you never know what people are going to like, so please let me know if you did. So far, the process of making this coat has been very smooth sailing, and I'm going to be honest with you, this week things went slightly off the rails. I found myself changing my mind about how I wanted things to look, and I also realized that my order of operations was wrong, and I needed to kind of go back in order to go forward. So I'll talk about that, but you'll probably see me get slightly frazzled at a couple of points, but by the end of the video, I got things back on track. I have a clear plan forward, and the coat is looking great. There's an airplane overhead. We do have a lot of ground to cover this week, so let's get started. In last week's video, I completed the fussy techniques that you have to get out of the way at the beginning in order to proceed to construction. I did the bound buttonholes and I did the welt pockets. I already had everything interfaced, so I'm able to move quickly into construction. And this coat has raglan sleeves, which means there's not a lot to sew here. So I've already done the side seams and I completed sewing my sleeves in the round. It was a 2-piece sleeve and I attached the sleeves to the coat. I should have added the cuff to my sleeves prior to doing that, but the reason that I didn't is because the cuffs are really crazy. If we revisit how the cuff looks on the pattern envelope cover, you can see it's exaggerated, it's beautiful, it's definitely this design element, and while I love how it looks, when it comes to how it feels, it's a little bit intense. You can see it's a very large pattern piece, and the way that this cuff is constructed is you make a tube, you interface part of it with hair canvas, and then it's folded into thirds. It's sewn onto the sleeve and then it's meant to be folded up. So that results in 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of your thick, heavy wool coating, plus hair canvas, plus you've got, your seam allowances and stuff in there. It's just a lot. And while it's a beautiful, dramatic look, the reality for my lifestyle feels a little bit crazy. If you're using your arms at all, if you're trying to carry a purse on your arm or a bag of groceries or something, I think it's a lot. I don't know, for me personally, it wasn't going to work. I didn't want that to hold me up. So I just left the cuff off and I'm going to get to it later. As drafted, the cuff is 5 inches wide. I think I would prefer it to be 2.5 or 3 inches. So I'll try the coat on, I'll see what that looks like and feels like, and then I'll add a cuff later. But otherwise, this came together quickly, so I can show it to you. Okay, I've got some updates for you. And yes, I am wearing the coat. But before I show it to you, I need you to lock in with me, okay? When you try on a coat at the halfway point, it looks bad. It looks bad every time. It might look like a choir robe. It might look like a bathrobe. And you need to use your imagination and look past that. Are you with me? We're going to look at this with a soft eye. Here we go. All right, I've done a few things. First things first. I tried it on, I was like, this is a terrible length. So I immediately removed 4 inches off the hem. I just cut that right off. And then I turned it up 3 inches, which is usually how far I turn up the hem on a coat. Okay, that's a big improvement. Then let's look at the sleeves. One is pinned and one is not. By the way, this is just like a piece of fabric around my neck. This one's pinned, how I'm going to alter it. This one's not. Can you tell the difference? I'll be taking out a little bit from the underarm. I think it's really cute and I think it has so much potential. I hope you can see it too, but I have a lot of work to do before we can get to the sequins. None of it's time consuming. I just need to do it. So let's do it. Okay, a quick update. I took in the sleeves in the way that I described. I took them in from the underarm. The outseam of the sleeve was really kicking out in a way that was kind of weird. And I think if I were applying the cuff, it would weigh it down. But since I don't know what I'm gonna do for the cuff, I just took it in a little bit. And I took it in from the underarm because I pinned one on the underarm and one on the outseam, and the underarm made the correction that I wanted to see. I did a few other things that I can't recall. But I know that I installed the sleeves, I modified the sleeve, and then I pressed all those seams open and catch stitched them into place. So we're in a good place now to move into sequins. When I tried the coat on, I marked where I would want sequins to go, because things that you need to bear in mind is putting your hand in the pocket. I don't want my sleeve and the body of the coat to rub together and have sequin on sequin contact, because they will rip each other out. So the path for my hand into my pocket has to remain blank of sequins. I would say the bulk of these sequins are going to go on my shoulders and along my back. There will be some at the front. And then because there's a large scale collar, I don't want to put a large concentration of sequins under the collar because they won't be seen, and again, it's a friction point, so I want to avoid that. Any excess friction will eventually cause your sequins to break off. Sequins have a hard plastic edge that will eventually saw its way through thread, so even if you're using a strong thread and multiple passes of thread, it's kind of inevitable at some point you might lose a sequin or two. To me, that is the beauty of wearing sequins. You have to think of yourself like a little snail shedding a sparkly path behind you. I have also included my buttons in the mix here because I want to see how that looks when I'm glancing at the coat as a whole. I know a lot of people prefer the darker button, but I like this lighter button. I think it's so beautiful, and I like how it looks with the sequins. They share a certain shimmeriness. I'll make the button decision at the end. This is the one I'm working with now. So today we have the very fun task of playing with sequins. I pulled out more sequins. I keep them in a variety of places in my studio, and I kept thinking, oh, there's more over there, there's more over there. I pulled them all out. So without further ado, let's get into sequin stuff. Let's take a closer look at the sequins that I'm going to use for this project, because I've pulled out more since my initial video where I sort of talked about, my early ideas. That was the first video in this series, and we're now further along, so there's been some developments. At that time, I could only find, I think, 4 pieces of this gorgeous, gigantic sequin. I've since located 16. Another important sequin is this one. This is a big and super iridescent floral shaped sequin. I bought these in Japan. Both of these shapes were gifts from my friend Rosemary, and this is a truly exceptional sequin. It's a harder plastic than your typical sequin, and it's very shaped. It has kind of greater depth than usual. I would say the edges have sort of a different quality to them too. It's just a slightly different material than your typical sequin. I don't think this really comes out on video, but it has a level of shimmer and sort of mother of pearl iridescence that makes all the other sequins pale in comparison. It's kind of amazing. Those 3 were sort of my anchor sequins. Those are the largest, and obviously they're all floral shaped, so that was really dictating, some of this theme. Since then, I have pulled out, let's see, I had this one in the initial, more floral sequins pull as well, and I talked about how this one has sort of like, I'm just gonna be honest, like a crappy quality to it. It's a little bit of a junky sequin. It doesn't have a good finish on it, and I like that. I think when you're dealing with these like very slick, beautiful materials, there's something nice about having a material that is gonna like get worn over time, and I think that contrast is very interesting. I'm already taking these shimmery plastic smooth materials and layering them onto the boucle, which is of course nubby and textural and soft and fuzzy. I like the contrast. I think it's fun. I had previously pulled out these clear sequins that are floral shaped, and I'm not sure they're making enough of an impact in this project. I might still use them in places, but they are actually too subtle. And I wanted another flower shaped piece kind of in this size range, and so I dug around and found these. And I was at first resistant to adding another color, but these are kind of irresistible. This is a metallic holographic blue. It is a pretty cold blue, and I think it plays nicely with some of this iridescence. The shape is a good repetition. These are another one from my friend Rosemary, and similarly, they are out of this harder plastic that is more molded. It's almost like a bead. These are exquisite. So these will be in the mix. I don't have too many of these, but they're really quite beautiful, and they have a nice dimension to them. And then finally, something that I pulled out just last night were these sequins. My husband bought these for me in Bangalore, India. He was there on a work trip, and anytime he travels without me, he looks for things like fabric or ribbons or sequins for me. He's very sweet like that. These are a very dimensional sequin, and they have a different cup shape than what you usually see from a round sequin, and it almost reads like a rhinestone. So these will definitely be used in this project just because their level of sparkle is outrageous. Okay, so that's my palette. Knowing that this is what I'll be using for sequins, I went into my bead stash, and here's what I pulled out. I'm really going with mostly clear beads, some silver. Okay, here's the thread that I'm using for this project. It is a top stitching thread, so it's a little bit thicker and heavier than a typical thread. I have been using it held double, so 2 layers. It's quite strong. Then I'm just using one of my favorite hand sewing needles. These are nothing special. I don't know where they came from. These are the beads I'm using. They're not a teeny tiny seed bead, which means that they pass easily over the eye of my needle, which is important. All of these notions are slightly more rustic to match my fabric. The fabric is also a little bit more rustic. You know, if I were beading on an organza or chiffon, I'd be using a teeny tiny, super sharp needle and tiny little seed beads and tiny little sequins, but I'm kind of matching to my project. And sort of on that note, let's take a look at how these are attached. Each cluster is sewn completely individually and heavily knotted. So there's a few layers of knots, and if one cluster came off, it would not impact any of the other clusters. That's a nice safety measure. These large ones have been secured into position, and then some of the smaller ones can spin, but I think with a few passes of thread, it's nice to hold some in place. All right, it's time for a little bit of a check-in, a little bit of an update. I've shown you all my sequins and talked about some of my ideas for it. And the truth is I have also sewn a lot of sequins onto the coat and then tried it on and filmed it and then watched the video back, and I didn't like it, which is fine. It's really easy to take the sequins off and move them. But what I'm realizing is I need to have the collar in so that I can get a clear idea of what this part of the coat looks like. I think when I have the collar in, I can better plan to have sequins sort of creeping out from beneath it and then fading into the fabric, which is really what my vision is. For a variety of reasons in planning this, it seemed like putting the sequins on before the collar made sense, but now that I'm further along, I don't think that it does, especially with the cut-on facings of this pattern. So what have I done? I've gotten ahead of myself. I've pad stitched my collar. This took me 1 hour and 45 minutes. I know that because that is the length of the podcast episode I listened to while I was doing it. I marked my roll line in pencil. You can see that here. And then I made my pad stitching slightly denser below the roll line, and then out here a little bit more loose. I would consider this loose pad stitching. Nothing here is too crazy. And you can see in this light that it's called pad stitching because it, creates this padded look. I made my pad stitching more dense at the points of the collar because in my opinion, that is where I need it most. I find that if I don't have pad stitching in a collar, if it's just interfaced with fusibles or whatever, that part gets a little bit floppy. This gives it really nice structure. I find that a helpful way to think about pad stitching is very much like quilting. If you've ever made a quilt or if you've ever just experienced a quilt, if you think about really dense quilting versus really sparse quilting, think of how that impacts the drape of that quilt fabric. It's the same concept here. If you have very dense or tight pad stitching, you'll get a stiffer effect than loose or sort of more sparse pad stitching. So I have my pad stitching in, and I'm now going to construct my collar. Very simple. And then I'm going to install it. I also need to make my back neckline facing. I like to add a little pizzazz there with my label and maybe a little bit of other stuff. So I need to kind of look through what I want to do there. So that'll take a little bit of time, but I think that this is going to ultimately give me a better idea of what the neckline of the coat looks like. I've also decided to just reduce the size of the cuff. I'm not sure if I misspoke earlier, but I believe the cuff is 5 inches deep. I'm going to make it like 2.5 inches deep, which is still a really nice looking cuff, but it's not as exaggerated. And I think it makes more sense for me personally. I don't really want like a lot of action right at my wrist. All of this was going to go into my next video, but I'm just doing what I'm doing, guys. Let's get to work and see what we can get done today. All right, I've tried my coat on again and we've had a big breakthrough, which is that I installed the collar. I'm realizing the further I get in here, I should have installed the collar before even thinking about sequins. More for like layout than any other reason, but it's in now. So we can move forward in a better way now. I've decided against showing you the method that I used to install my collar. I followed my pattern. It was kind of specific to this pattern because I have these cut on facings, but it's nice. It really reduced bulk, but it was a sort of like annoying way to do it. There are much easier ways to install a collar. So I'm gonna let you follow whatever your pattern says. Just kidding, I'll show you a little bit because I'm about to press it and then do some hand sewing. So here we're looking at the inside of the collar. I sewed the upper collar to the facing and the under collar to the coat, but then you also need to sew the facing and the shell together over here. So this part right here was quite tricky. It was difficult to maneuver, and I'm gonna rip out one side and redo it because it's not very neat. But what I like about this is that now both sides will be pressed open and stitched open and then sewn together here, stitch in the ditch, and the machine never needs to go through more than 2 layers of fabric. You do see similar techniques to this, but usually you'd sew these pieces together, and then you'd attach them here later. This had this done first. I think that added a level of difficulty that wasn't really necessary, if I'm honest. Anyway, maybe that made sense to you, maybe it didn't. Either way, here's a little treat. A look at my back neckline facing. Okay. I feel like this looks like a big giant crazy coat right now because it really does need like a good steam and press and like top stitching, whatever, you know, but we have to use our imagination. Soft eye, okay? But the collar's great. And then I'll be adding my cuff as well, so that's gonna give it a little bit more of a finished look. But the main thing I wanna talk about are the sequins. See these? They're coming out. Everything's getting ripped out. What I have here is a little bit more promising. I really have a vision for the way in which the sequins creep out from under the collar, and then I'll have smaller sequins to like integrate it more into the fabric. So sequins are coming out and then they're going back in. Real talk, it's Friday afternoon and I publish my videos Saturdays at 11, so we're probably not gonna get a lot more progress this week, but everything I just mentioned can happen for next week. We're on a roll. Things are looking good. I now have a more clear plan for my sequin layout, and I think the inside of the coat is gonna look really nice too. So we're on track. We're still on track. Thank you so much for joining me on another week of sewing this coat. We are nearing the end and we're running out of things to do. Just kidding. There's so much more to do on this coat. So let's talk about what's to come. Obviously, I've got to do sequins. So that will be my next step. I need to sew on my cuffs. That should go pretty quickly, but like I need to do it and I've definitely been procrastinating it. After that, I need to cut out my lining and I have decided to make a couple of small drafting tweaks to it. Once my lining is cut out and assembled, it will go in pretty quickly. I need to deal with the hem of this coat, which will be interfaced with some hair canvas. And then there's always a bit of hand sewing at the end of a coat project. Most of it is totally unavoidable and it really will give your coat a nice finish. First of all, sewing on my buttons, but there will also be a few places where you want to securely attach the layers of your coat together so it's not like this big pocket of like the shell and the lining with air in between. You want to bring them together in a few places. I'm not sure how many techniques off that checklist are going to get done in the coming week because the sequining will take me a little bit of time. This week when sewing on the sequins, I was a little bit mindless. I was like watching movies and sewing on the sequins and not really paying attention to where I was placing them, and you can see that got me into trouble. This week I'm going to focus on that and be much more deliberate in my sequin placement. So I'll probably show more of that and we can get a better looking sequin result from it. And then everything else should kind of fall into place after that. I think there might be 2 videos left in this series. We're gonna find out as we go. I would love to wrap it up because it's cold out and I would love to wear this coat for the holidays. All right, on that note, I need to get back to sewing. If you like this video, please give it a like. Please subscribe to follow along to all that is left to come with this and more. And I will see you next week. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.